What happens when one of Hollywood's most humble and universally admired actors is pushed past his breaking point on live television? What we witnessed that morning on the Drew Barrymore show wasn't just another celebrity interview gone awkward. It was a public unraveling of boundaries, dignity, and human decency, broadcast in real time. By the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why Keanu Reeves, the man known for his patience, kindness, and grace, stood up, walked off that stage, and left millions of viewers stunned. And perhaps why he might never return to daytime television again. It began like any other Tuesday morning taping. The studio buzzed with energy. Audience members clutched their coffee cups and phones, whispering in anticipation as producers hurried across the set, making last-minute adjustments to lights and microphones. The air carried that familiar hum of television magic, the illusion that something joyful and spontaneous was about to unfold. Drew Barrymore, radiant as always, sat in her host chair with that trademark glow of enthusiasm that had made her show a daytime favorite. When the announcer's voice echoed through the studio, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Keanu Reeves." The crowd erupted. Applause thundered through the space as the actor walked out from behind the curtain. He was dressed simply in his signature black suit, hair slightly tousled, his smile modest but warm. There was something about him that disarmed people instantly. The quiet humility, the gentle nods of appreciation toward the cheering fans. For a man of such immense fame, he carried himself like someone who still remembered the weight of normal life. Drew greeted him with open arms and that wide, contagious grin. "Keanu, it's so wonderful to have you here." She beamed. "I've been dying to talk to you. I think our audience has a few questions they've been wanting answered for years." Keanu gave a soft chuckle. "Thank you for having me, Drew. It's great to be here," he said. His voice was calm, measured, like someone who had mastered the art of sincerity without spectacle. What followed, however, would shatter that calm completely. "So," Drew continued, leaning forward, eyes gleaming with curiosity, "I've been reading quite a bit about your personal life lately." She paused for effect, smiling as if she were about to ask something harmless. "Don't you think it's kind of strange that someone your age is still single? I mean, most successful men have settled down by now." "What's going on there?" The question hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The audience's laughter faltered. A few nervous chuckles sputtered, then silence. Keanu blinked, caught off guard but not angry. "Not yet." "Well," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I think everyone's journey is different. Drew, I don't really see my relationship status as something that defines my worth or success." But Drew wasn't satisfied. Her tone sharpened slightly, even as she maintained that on-camera smile. "Come on," she teased. "You're Keanu Reeves. You could have anyone you want. Are you holding out for someone impossibly perfect? Or are there maybe some issues we don't know about?" The crowd stirred uncomfortably. A woman in the second row frowned. Even the camera operators, trained to stay invisible, seemed to hesitate. The lightness of the moment had evaporated. Keanu's jaw tightened just slightly. Still, his voice remained steady. "That's a pretty personal question," he said, his calm now carrying an edge. "And I'm not sure it's relevant to why I'm here today. I thought we were going to talk about my new film." "Oh, we'll get to that," Drew said breezily, waving her hand as if brushing off his discomfort. "But our viewers want to know the real Keanu. They want to understand why someone who seems so perfect can't maintain a long-term relationship. Is it commitment issues? Fear of intimacy?" The words landed like barbs. Keanu's eyes, usually full of gentle humor, hardened. He took a slow breath before replying. "Drew," he said quietly but firmly, "I really don't think this is appropriate. My personal life isn't entertainment for your audience." For a brief second, the mask slipped from Drew's face. Her smile thinned. "Everything is entertainment," she shot back. "That's the business we're in. You came on my show, Keanu. You signed up for this." That was the moment the energy shifted completely. The charm drained from the room. The tension was so thick that even the audience didn't dare clap or laugh. "Actually," Keanu replied, still calm but with unmistakable steel in his voice, "I came here to promote a film I'm passionate about. To talk about storytelling, about the craft, about art. I didn't sign up to have my personal tragedies turned into talking points for ratings." The entire studio went silent. Drew's expression flickered, a mix of irritation and embarrassment. But rather than backing down, she doubled down. "Look," she said with mock sympathy. I get it. It must be hard being the sad, lonely guy in Hollywood. The tragic figure who lost his girlfriend and his child and never recovered. That's the narrative people talk about, right? The heartbroken Keanu. The air seemed to freeze. Even the stage lights felt harsh, unforgiving. The audience gasped audibly, a collective intake of breath as if someone had crossed an invisible line. For a long moment, Keanu didn't move. His face was still, but the pain behind his eyes was unmistakable. It was as if she had ripped open old wounds, ones he had spent decades learning to carry quietly, privately. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled not with rage, but with something deeper, heartbreak and disbelief. You don't have the right, he said softly. You don't have the right to use other people's grief as entertainment. Not mine. Not anyone's. Drew shifted in her seat, caught off guard by the gravity of his tone. But before she could respond, Keanu continued. I've been through enough loss in my life to know the value of kindness. And what you're doing right now, this isn't kindness. It's cruelty dressed as curiosity. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Drew seemed unsure of herself now. A producer off camera gestured frantically, signaling to cut to commercial, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the most raw, unscripted moment in the show's history. Keanu stood up slowly, the audience watching in stunned disbelief. I think we're done here, he said quietly. He gave a small, respectful nod to the crowd, not to Drew, and walked off stage without another word. The applause that followed wasn't the usual enthusiastic clapping of a talk show audience. It was hesitant, reverent, like a collective acknowledgement that they had just witnessed something real, something uncomfortable, something true. Drew sat frozen, her usual sparkle gone. The cameras finally cut, but the damage was already done. Within hours, the clip had gone viral. Fans from around the world flooded social media, defending Keanu and condemning the show's cruelty. Words like exploitative, heartless, and disrespectful trended alongside his name. And as for Keanu Reeves, the man who had always handled fame with humility and grace, he didn't issue a statement. He didn't appear on another talk show. He simply went back to work quietly the way he always did, because sometimes silence speaks louder than any headline ever could. His face went completely still. The calm, gentle demeanor that fans had come to associate with Keanu Reeves was suddenly gone, replaced by a chilling stillness that spoke louder than any outburst could. The air inside the studio thickened. You could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights, the distant whir of camera equipment, and the nervous shifting of the audience in their seats. It felt like the entire world had gone silent, waiting for him to speak. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, almost too quiet, but it carried a weight that silenced every whisper, every nervous cough, every movement. That's enough, he said simply. The words hung there, sharp, heavy, final. Drew laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that comes from discomfort, not amusement. What do you mean, that's enough? We're just having a conversation here, she said, forcing a brightness into her tone that no longer sounded natural. Keanu turned his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. No, Drew, he said. This isn't a conversation. This is what bad talk shows are for. A collective gasp rippled through the studio. Even the camera operators froze, unsure whether to keep filming or cut away. Good talk shows, Keanu continued, his voice calm but edged with steel, are about connection, about sharing stories that matter, about treating people, guests, audiences, with basic human dignity. Drew scoffed, her friendly mask cracking for the first time. Oh, please, she said, rolling her eyes. Don't lecture me about dignity, Keanu. You've spent your entire career playing the same brooding character over and over again. At least I'm trying to show people who you really are. For the first time, Keanu's composure slipped just enough for the audience to see something flicker behind his calm exterior. Disappointment. He stood up slowly from his chair, every movement deliberate, controlled. The sound of his jacket brushing against the microphone echoed in the otherwise silent studio. You have no idea who I really am, he said quietly. Then after a beat, he added, and frankly, after this conversation, I'm not sure you have any idea who you really are either. The audience froze. No one dared clap. No one dared move. The tension was so palpable that it almost hummed in the air like static. Drew's face flushed red, Whether from embarrassment or anger, no one could tell. "Excuse me?" she said finally, her voice rising, brittle with defensiveness. "I know exactly who I am. I'm someone who asks the questions that matter. Someone who doesn't let celebrities hide behind their publicists and their perfectly crafted images." Keanu's expression didn't change. His voice remained calm, but every word landed with devastating precision. "No, Drew. You're someone who mistakes cruelty for curiosity. You're someone who confuses invasion of privacy with authenticity." It was like a verbal knockout punch delivered in slow motion. Drew opened her mouth to respond, once, twice, "Piel," but no words came out. The silence that followed stretched so long it felt unbearable. Cameras kept rolling, but no one on set dared interrupt. When Drew finally spoke again, her voice was smaller, sharper, defensive in a way that made everyone in the room uneasy. "You know what, Keanu?" she said, crossing her arms and leaning back. "I think you're being incredibly unfair right now. I'm trying to have a real conversation with you, not some sanitized, PR-approved interview where you say nothing real." Keanu tilted his head slightly, his eyes steady. "A real conversation," he said, "involves mutual respect. It involves listening, not waiting for your next chance to attack." The audience could practically feel the floor tilt beneath them. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was confrontation. Raw, uncomfortable, real. Drew laughed again, a strained, higher-pitched sound. "I'm asking legitimate questions that millions of people want answers to," she said. "You're a public figure, Keanu. This comes with the territory." Keanu's expression softened, not out of surrender but out of sadness. "Being a public figure doesn't mean surrendering your humanity," he said, his voice quieter now, but somehow even more powerful. "It doesn't mean that every painful moment of your life is fair game for someone else's ratings." The audience shifted again. Some looked down, others stared at Drew, visibly uncomfortable. The moment felt like watching someone realize, too late, that they'd crossed a line they could never uncross. Drew's eyes hardened. "Oh, so now I'm supposed to feel sorry for you?" she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "The millionaire movie star who gets paid obscene amounts of money to pretend to be other people?" "Give me a break." Keanu's lips tightened. His patience, legendary in Hollywood, was clearly wearing thin, but his restraint was still intact. "This isn't about money, Drew," he said evenly. "It's about decency, something that shouldn't disappear just because a camera's rolling." "Decency?" Drew repeated, her voice rising again. "Don't lecture me about decency. You think I'm doing this for clicks? For viral moments?" Keanu looked at her for a long time before replying, long enough for the audience to feel the silence pressing down on them. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's exactly what I think." The words hit harder than any shout could. Drew's face went pale, then red. She stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward across the set with a loud scrape. "You think you know me?" she snapped. "You think I'm some fame-hungry host chasing social media attention?" Keanu didn't flinch. His voice was low, but it carried through the room with eerie clarity. "I think you've lost sight of what conversation actually means," he said. "You've mistaken confrontation for honesty. You've mistaken spectacle for truth." The entire studio was frozen. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or remain silent. Even the producers, normally poised behind their glass windows, seemed paralyzed. Drew's breathing was audible now, sharp and uneven. "You don't get it, Keanu," she said finally. "People want this. They want the raw, unfiltered truth. They don't want the polished Hollywood version." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe the truth is this," he said. "You can't claim to want honesty while humiliating people in the process. You can't claim to care about truth if your first instinct is to twist pain into performance." And with that, the room fell into absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The moment felt sacred, not because it was beautiful, but because it was real. Keanu stood there for another beat, calm, composed, and heartbreakingly human. Then, with a quiet sigh, he said, "I hope someday you remember what this was supposed to be about, Drew. Conversation, empathy, understanding, not spectacle." Without another word, he turned and walked off stage. The studio audience erupted, not with cheers but with stunned murmurs, a scattered applause from those who understood what they had just witnessed. Drew Barrymore remained standing in silence, her hand resting on the back of her chair, her expression unreadable. The cameras continued to roll until the director, finally breaking from his trance, cut the feed, but it was already too late. The moment would live on, not as a viral stunt, but as a reminder of how one man's calm dignity could dismantle an entire system built on spectacle. "There's a difference," Keanu said softly, his words cutting through the silence, "between someone choosing to share their story and someone being cornered into revealing their pain." For a moment, Drew didn't respond. The audience barely breathed. The warmth that usually filled her stage had evaporated, replaced by an icy stillness that made every second stretch longer. "I never cornered anyone," Drew said finally, her voice trembling ever so slightly. But even as the words left her mouth, there was no conviction behind them, just the hollow ring of self-defense. Keanu looked at her, not with anger, but with an almost unbearable calm. "You cornered me from the moment I sat down," he said quietly. "You decided, before this interview even started, that my personal trauma would be your entertainment for the day." The accusation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. The audience's faces said everything: discomfort, disbelief, empathy. Drew's own expression shifted from defiance to shock, to something resembling shame. "I was just trying to have a meaningful conversation," she said weakly, her voice faltering as if she was hearing herself for the first time. "No," Keanu said, his tone gentle but unrelenting. "You were trying to create a viral moment at my expense. And the saddest part of all is that you've probably convinced yourself that exploitation is the same thing as journalism." The sentence hit like a thunderclap. Drew's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked around the studio, at her producers, at the audience, at the cameras still recording. But there was no rescue coming. This was live. This was real. For the first time in a long while, Drew Barrymore, the seasoned performer, the television veteran, was completely speechless. Her face flushed red, then drained of color. Finally, anger rushed in to fill the silence. "Get off my stage," she snapped suddenly, her voice sharp, brittle, almost breaking. Keanu didn't flinch. "I was already leaving," he said simply. There was no malice in his voice, no grandstanding, and just an unmistakable sadness. He paused, then added, "I just wanted you to understand what you'd become before I did." The words landed softly, but their impact was seismic. Drew froze. The audience did too. It was the kind of statement that no one could respond to. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Keanu turned to walk away, his black suit blending into the shadows beyond the stage lights. But before disappearing behind the curtain, he stopped and looked back. Drew was still standing there behind her desk, but something in her posture had changed. The confidence, the bravado, all of it had melted away. She looked smaller now, not as a celebrity, not as a host, but as a person who had just seen herself through someone else's eyes. "I hope you find your way back to who you used to be," Keanu said quietly. His voice carried not bitterness, but something that sounded almost like compassion, because that person was worth knowing, and with that he turned and walked off the stage. The studio was dead silent. The only sound was the faint echo of his footsteps fading into the distance. The audience, hundreds of people who had come expecting laughter, charm, and light-hearted stories, sat frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. Some looked at Drew, others whispered softly to one another, but no one clapped. This wasn't a moment for applause. It was a moment of reckoning. Drew remained behind her desk, motionless. Her eyes darted toward the cameras, then to the floor, then back again. The expression on her face was something between disbelief and regret. The cameras, still rolling, caught everything. The trembling of her hand as she reached for her water glass. The quiver in her voice as she tried to regain control of the show. "We'll be right back," she said weakly to the lens. It came out almost as a whisper. The teleprompter was frozen. The producers in the control room staring at their monitors in stunned silence. But everyone, the crew, the audience, the millions who would soon see the clip online, knew that nothing about this would go back to normal after the break. What happened on that stage wasn't just a celebrity walking off a talk show. It was something much deeper. It was a moment of moral clarity, a masterclass in dignity under pressure, in truth spoken without shouting, in strength shown without cruelty. Keanu Reeves, the man known for his humility and quiet kindness, had just shown the world how to draw a boundary, and how to do it with grace. He didn't fight fire with fire. He didn't insult or belittle. Instead, he held up a mirror, and when Drew saw her reflection, she didn't like what she saw. The internet exploded within hours. Clips of the exchange flooded social media, viewed millions of times in just a single day. Hashtags like Keanu Speaks Truth and Respect Over Ratings began trending worldwide. Comment sections filled with people praising Keanu for standing his ground. Finally, someone said it, one user wrote. This is why we love him, because even when he's angry, he's still kind. Others called it a turning point for daytime television, a wake-up call about how entertainment often crosses into exploitation. Memes, think pieces, and reaction videos dissected every line, every expression. But the message was clear. The public was on Keanu's side. Meanwhile, Drew Barrymore went silent. For days, she released no statement. Insiders claimed she was devastated by what happened. Some said she broke down in tears after the camera stopped rolling, realizing too late that she had turned a human being's pain into a spectacle and had been called out on it live. But Keanu said nothing. No interviews, no tweets, no press releases. He simply went back to filming his next project, donating quietly to charity as he often did, and letting the world draw its own conclusions. Because sometimes silence is the most powerful statement of all. In an era where fame often demands constant exposure, where vulnerability is packaged and sold, and empathy competes with algorithms, Keanu Reeves reminded everyone that authenticity doesn't have to mean self-destruction. That dignity still matters. That being human means saying enough when the world tries to turn your pain into profit. And perhaps that's why this moment resonated so deeply. It wasn't just about a talk show gone wrong. It was about what happens when kindness refuses to be exploited, when integrity refuses to perform. Keanu Reeves walked off that stage, but he didn't storm out. He ascended it, in a way. He left behind a studio full of stunned people and a host who had just been given the most devastating performance review of her career. One delivered not with anger, but with truth. And as for Drew Barrymore, perhaps she'll one day look back on that morning, not as the day she lost control of an interview, but as the day someone forced her, however painfully, to look in the mirror. Because sometimes, the most uncomfortable moments are the ones that teach us who we really are. So if you took something from this story, about integrity, empathy, or courage, make sure to subscribe for more stories that remind us of what really matters. And let us know in the comments. Do celebrities owe the public total transparency? Or do we as viewers owe them the basic decency of privacy? Because in the end, it's not just about one talk show or one actor. It's about who we are and who we choose to be when the cameras are rolling.